Your heart is beating right now, approximately 70 times per minute, 4,000 times per hour, 100,000 times per day. And with every single beat, it is pushing blood through a network of blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries that laid end to end would stretch approximately 60,000 miles. 60,000 miles of living tissue. Tissue that ages, tissue that stiffens, tissue that can harden, narrow, and become less able to do the work it was designed to do. And here is what most people do not know. The rate at which your arteries age is not fixed. It is not simply determined by the number of candles on your birthday cake. It is profoundly, directly, measurably influenced by your metabolic health, by your blood sugar, by your insulin levels, by the chronic inflammation that runs quietly in the background of a body managing insulin resistance. Your arteries can be older than you are, or younger. And today, I want to show you exactly how that happens, what blood sugar does to the walls of your arteries, why insulin resistance accelerates arterial aging in ways that most people and even many physicians have never fully connected, and what the science now tells us about reversing this process, slowing it, in some cases meaningfully turning it back. This is not a video about fear. This is a video about understanding the most important organ system in your body and the direct biological thread that connects your metabolic choices to your cardiovascular longevity. Let me start with what an artery actually is. An artery is not a passive pipe. It is a living, dynamic muscular tube. Its walls are composed of three distinct layers. The innermost layer, the one that comes into direct contact with the blood flowing through, is called the endothelium. It is a single layer of cells, just one cell thick, but functionally one of the most important tissues in the human body. The endothelium regulates blood pressure by releasing compounds that cause the artery to expand and contract. It regulates clotting, it controls inflammation. It manages the passage of nutrients and signals between the bloodstream and the surrounding tissue. A healthy endothelium is smooth, flexible, and responsive. It functions like a sophisticated sensory and control surface, continuously monitoring the blood flowing past it and adjusting the artery's behavior accordingly. But the endothelium is exquisitely sensitive to damage, and the conditions created by chronically high blood sugar and insulin resistance are among the most damaging environments the endothelium can be exposed to. Let me walk you through what happens to arterial tissue when blood sugar is chronically elevated. The first process is called glycation. Glycation is the binding of glucose molecules to proteins. When blood sugar is consistently high, when glucose is flooding the bloodstream meal after meal, hour after hour, glucose begins attaching itself to proteins throughout the body, including the proteins that make up the structural tissues of your arteries. Glycated proteins behave differently from healthy proteins. They are stiffer. They cross-link with neighboring proteins, creating a kind of molecular scaffolding that reduces the elasticity and flexibility of the arterial wall. This is one of the primary mechanisms by which chronic high blood sugar causes arteries to stiffen and harden, a process called arteriosclerosis. The clinical measure of glycation you are already familiar with from this series is the HbA1c, the glycated hemoglobin test that reflects your average blood sugar over 3 months. What that test is actually measuring is the degree to which glucose has been binding to hemoglobin proteins in your red blood cells. And the same process that is happening in your blood cells is happening in the walls of your arteries. Every point of elevated A1C represents not just higher average blood sugar, it represents more glycation, more protein stiffening, more loss of arterial elasticity, more accelerated aging of the arterial wall. The second process is oxidative stress. When glucose metabolism is dysregulated, when the energy-producing machinery inside cells is overwhelmed by excess glucose, it generates what are called reactive oxygen species, free radicals, unstable molecules that damage cellular structures. The endothelial cells lining the arteries are particularly vulnerable to oxidative damage because they are directly exposed to everything circulating in the blood. High glucose generates excess reactive oxygen species directly within endothelial cells. This damages their DNA, impairs their mitochondria, and disrupts the signals they use to regulate vascular function. One of the most critical functions the endothelium performs is producing a molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is what causes arteries to dilate, to widen in response to increased blood flow demands, such as during physical activity or in response to changing blood pressure. Healthy nitric oxide production keeps arteries flexible and responsive. Oxidative stress generated by high blood sugar directly impairs nitric oxide production. Oxidized compounds react with nitric oxide and neutralize it before it can function. The result is endothelial dysfunction. The artery loses some of its ability to dilate appropriately. It becomes less responsive, more rigid in its behavior. Endothelial dysfunction is now recognized as the earliest measurable stage of cardiovascular disease, occurring years and sometimes decades before any clinical symptoms appear. And chronic high blood sugar is one of its most consistent and powerful drivers. The third process is inflammation. We have discussed chronic low-grade inflammation throughout this series in the context of insulin resistance. But its specific effect on arterial tissue is worth examining in detail, because this is where the connection between metabolic health and heart disease becomes most direct. When endothelial cells are damaged by glycation, by oxidative stress, by the inflammatory molecules released from insulin-resistant fat tissue, they display signals on their surface that attract immune cells. White blood cells, called monocytes, begin sticking to the damaged endothelial surface and burrowing into the artery wall. Inside the artery wall, these immune cells encounter oxidized LDL cholesterol, LDL that has been damaged by the same oxidative stress we just discussed. They engulf it, they become filled with cholesterol droplets, and they become what pathologists call foam cells, the cellular building blocks of arterial plaques. This process, endothelial damage, immune cell infiltration, foam cell formation, is the mechanism of atherosclerosis. The progressive buildup of plaque inside arterial walls that narrows and stiffens them over time. And insulin resistance accelerates this process through multiple simultaneous pathways. Higher blood sugar drives glycation and oxidative stress, damaging the endothelium. Higher insulin levels in the bloodstream stimulate the liver to produce more LDL particles and more triglycerides, increasing the supply of oxidizable cholesterol in the blood. The chronic inflammation of insulin resistance generates inflammatory molecules that independently damage the endothelial lining and promote immune cell adhesion. Insulin resistance in fat cells causes them to release inflammatory molecules called cytokines, including TNF-alpha and interleukin-6 that we have discussed before, that circulate in the blood and reach the arteries, compounding the local inflammatory damage. This is why the risk of cardiovascular disease is dramatically elevated in people with type 2 diabetes. Not merely because of high blood sugar, but because insulin resistance is simultaneously driving multiple distinct pathways of arterial damage. Now let me turn to the question that actually matters. Can this be reversed? And here the science offers something genuinely remarkable. The arterial wall is living tissue. It has a capacity for repair and renewal. The endothelium regenerates. Inflammatory processes can be quieted. Oxidative stress can be reduced. Glycation, while not fully reversible in established tissue, slows dramatically when blood sugar is controlled, allowing healthier new tissue to form. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the UK PDS study, tracking thousands of people with type 2 diabetes over decades, found that improved blood sugar control significantly reduced cardiovascular events. And subsequent research has confirmed that the degree of benefit is directly proportional to how much and how early blood sugar management is improved. More recent research using arterial stiffness measurements, a technology called pulse wave velocity that measures how quickly the pulse propagates through the arterial system, which reflects arterial elasticity, has shown that meaningful improvements in blood sugar control are associated with measurable reductions in arterial stiffness over months to years. The arteries become more flexible, more responsive, younger in their functional behavior. A meta-analysis published in the journal Atherosclerosis found that lifestyle interventions, specifically dietary changes, increased physical activity, and weight management in people with insulin resistance produced significant reductions in arterial stiffness measurements over intervention periods of 6 months to 2 years. 6 months to 2 years, not decades. Measurable arterial changes in the time frame of a serious lifestyle commitment. This is not a guarantee of reversal for every individual. The degree of improvement depends on the severity of existing damage, the consistency of the intervention, age, genetics, and other factors. Some arterial changes, calcified plaques for example, are largely irreversible regardless of metabolic improvement. But the trajectory matters, the direction matters. And the research is clear that the direction can be changed. Let me tell you about a patient I want you to meet through his test results rather than through a personal encounter. His name was Walter, 69 years old. He came to me not in crisis but in awareness. He had watched his older brother suffer a heart attack at 64, and he had decided quietly, deliberately, that he was going to do everything within his control to change the trajectory his own health was on. His initial workup showed a fasting blood sugar of 128, an A1C of 7.2, elevated triglycerides, low HDL, mildly elevated blood pressure. And when we ran an arterial stiffness measurement, his pulse wave velocity, the measure of how stiff his arteries were, was consistent with someone significantly older than his biological age. His arteries were functioning approximately 8 years older than they should have been for a man of 69. Walter was methodical in a way I have rarely seen. He absorbed the information about blood sugar management, implemented the protocols we discussed, and applied them with consistent discipline over the following 18 months. At 18 months, his A1C was 6.4, his fasting glucose averaged 108, his triglycerides had normalized, his HDL had risen, his blood pressure managed with a lower medication dose was well controlled, and his arterial stiffness measurement repeated at 18 months had improved significantly. His pulse wave velocity now corresponded to an arterial age approximately 4 years younger than his baseline measurement, not to his chronological age, but 4 years younger than where he had started. His arteries had, by the measure of that test, become measurably less stiff, more elastic, more like younger arteries. He looked at the comparison printouts and said something that I have thought about many times since. I was aging faster than I had to, I just didn't know I had any say in the speed. You have a say in the speed. That is the message of this video, and it connects directly to everything we have discussed throughout this entire series. Let me bring together the specific things that protect arterial health and how each one connects to what you have already learned. The first is blood sugar control, specifically reducing the height and frequency of glucose spikes. Every time blood sugar surges sharply after a meal, glycation accelerates, oxidative stress spikes, and the inflammatory response in the arterial wall is amplified. Every time you blunt a post-meal glucose spike through food composition, through post-meal walking, through the plate method, through eating in the right sequence, you are reducing the cumulative glycation burden on your arterial walls. This is why the A1C matters for the heart, not just for the kidneys and the eyes. A1C is the proxy measurement of how much glycation has been occurring. Lower A1C means less arterial protein stiffening, more elastic arteries, slower vascular aging. The second is reducing chronic inflammation, which connects directly to the anti-inflammatory fats, the fermentable fiber, the spices, and the gut microbiome work we have discussed. Inflammation drives arterial plaque development. Every sustained reduction in systemic inflammation, measurable through markers like CRP, interleukin-6, and TNF-alpha, represents a quieting of the immune activity within arterial walls. Less foam cell formation, slower plaque progression. In some cases, stabilization of existing plaques in ways that reduce their risk of rupture. The olive oil, the omega-3 fatty acids,
the turmeric, the ginger,
the fermentable fiber that feeds gut bacteria and generates short-chain fatty acids. All of these are reducing the inflammatory environment in which your arteries exist every day. The third is restoring nitric oxide production, which is directly connected to controlling oxidative stress. The best dietary promoters of nitric oxide production include the green leafy vegetables, spinach, arugula, kale, which are rich in dietary nitrates that the body converts to nitric oxide. They include the polyphenol-rich foods, berries, olive oil, dark chocolate in small amounts, whose antioxidant compounds protect nitric oxide from being neutralized by free radicals. And they include adequate physical activity, which is the strongest known stimulus for nitric oxide production in endothelial cells. Every post-meal walk you take, every gentle morning movement routine, every sustained reduction in blood sugar and oxidative stress. All of these are supporting the endothelium's capacity to produce nitric oxide and maintain arterial flexibility. The fourth is protecting sleep. We have been building toward the sleep video throughout this series, and I will not preempt it fully here. But for arterial health specifically, sleep deprivation is one of the most potent activators of inflammatory pathways and one of the most reliable drivers of elevated blood pressure, which is independently one of the most damaging forces acting on arterial walls. Blood pressure is the mechanical stress the blood exerts on the arterial wall with every heartbeat. Chronically elevated blood pressure, hypertension, damages the endothelium through shear stress, accelerates plaque formation at points of turbulence in the vasculature, and stiffens arteries through the structural adaptations the arterial wall makes in response to sustained high pressure. Protecting sleep protects blood pressure, and protecting blood pressure is protecting the arteries. The fifth is the 12-hour fasting window and its specific effect on arterial health. Research on time-restricted eating, which is the formal scientific term for what we call the 12-hour rule, has found that beyond its effects on blood sugar and insulin sensitivity, it produces measurable reductions in inflammatory markers, triglycerides, and blood pressure in people with metabolic syndrome. A study published in Cell Metabolism found that a 10-hour eating window, maintained consistently for 12 weeks in people with metabolic syndrome, produced significant reductions in blood pressure, LDL cholesterol, and inflammatory markers, without any caloric restriction or changes in the composition of what participants ate. The timing window alone, the consistent daily fasting period, was producing vascular benefits through mechanisms that included improved circadian regulation of lipid metabolism, reduced oxidative stress, and lower inflammatory activity. Let me now give you a practical summary of what an arterially protective day looks like, drawing from the full body of work we have built across this series. You wake up and do your 30-second morning movement sequence, followed by a glass of cold water. The movement activates nitric oxide production and blood sugar disposal. The water addresses dehydration, which when chronic is associated with elevated blood pressure through the vasopressin mechanism we discussed earlier. You eat a breakfast containing 30 to 40 grams of protein, healthy fat, and a small amount of low glycemic carbohydrate. You eat the protein and vegetables before any carbohydrate. Breakfast does not contain fast sugars or hidden sweeteners from gummy vitamins or flavored drinks. You walk for 10 to 15 minutes immediately after finishing breakfast. At lunch, you include a source of fermentable fiber, lentils, chickpeas, or barley, alongside protein and non-starchy vegetables. You walk after lunch when possible. Your anti-inflammatory spices, cinnamon, turmeric with black pepper, ginger appear somewhere in your meals or beverages. Your dinner is finished by 7 p.m. whenever possible. It follows the plate method. It contains anti-inflammatory fats, olive oil, avocado, fatty fish if it is a fish evening. You walk after dinner. You spend the 30 minutes before bed managing evening cortisol, slow breathing, no bright screens, a calm and quiet wind down. You sleep 7 to 8 hours. You wake up and do it again, not perfectly every day, consistently most days, over months and years. This is not a dramatic intervention. There is no surgery, no extreme restriction, no medication being added. What this is, instead, is a sustained daily reduction in the specific biological processes that age your arteries faster than they need to age. Lower blood sugar, less glycation, less oxidative stress, less inflammation, better nitric oxide production, better sleep, better pressure management. Every one of these processes is addressed somewhere in the habits of this series. And together, they create the conditions under which the living tissue of your arterial wall can begin to function more like younger tissue. Not because time has been reversed, but because the biological environment that was accelerating aging has been changed. Walter had a say in the speed, and so do you. Before I close, the reminder that belongs in every video and belongs especially in this one. If you have existing cardiovascular disease, if you have had a heart attack or stroke, if you are on blood thinners, statins, blood pressure medication, or any cardiovascular medication, please work closely with your cardiologist or physician as you apply these lifestyle changes. Improvements in metabolic health can affect blood pressure and cholesterol in ways that interact with medication. These are good changes, but they need to be monitored and managed by someone who knows your full clinical picture. And if you know someone who has been told that their heart health is deteriorating, someone who believes that arterial aging is simply what happens and that nothing can meaningfully change the trajectory, please share this video with them. The science is clear, the trajectory can be changed. The speed is not fixed, and every day is an opportunity to slow what does not have to go as fast. Next week, we arrive at the final major topic in this series, the one we have referenced in almost every single episode: sleep. Why sleeping badly is one of the most powerful metabolic disruptors that exists. What one night of poor sleep does to your blood sugar, your inflammation, your hunger hormones, and your arterial health the following day. And what you can begin doing tonight, specific, practical, evidence-based, to start sleeping in a way that protects everything we have worked to build together. It ties the entire series together. Do not miss it. Subscribe, hit the bell. I will see you next week. I am Dr. Sterling. Take care of your heart tonight. It has been working for you without stopping since before you were born. The least you can do is make its environment a little easier to live in.